The rain taps like fingers on your windshield. The road stretches endlessly ahead. And the shadows, they're moving. You thought you were alone out here, but something's watching. Every flash of lightning reveals a little more than you want to see. These are the stories from the darkest drives, the haunted highways, and the roads you were never meant to travel. Welcome to Rainy Night Drive Horror Stories. Story 1. This happened when I was making a long road trip from my quiet hometown to the city where my new college was located. My cheap SUV was packed to the brim, clothes stuffed into bags, books wedged between seats, and random essentials crammed into the trunk and back seat. I was excited, sure, but also a little on edge. This was my first time living away from home, and the reality of that was just starting to hit. I'd never driven this far by myself, and the unfamiliarity of it all had me riding a fine line between anticipation and unease. The GPS said the trip would take a little over 10 hours total, which I'd planned to split over 2 days. I followed whatever route the map gave me, weaving through back roads and small highways to avoid major traffic. According to the estimated time, I was supposed to reach my motel by around 8 p.m., but I knew that was optimistic. With food stops, bathroom breaks, and fuel, I figured I wouldn't be pulling in until much later. As the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky grew darker, I noticed fewer and fewer cars on the road. At first it was kind of peaceful, just me, the road, and the hum of the engine. But as the darkness deepened, so did the silence. Occasionally, a pair of headlights would appear in the distance, growing larger as a vehicle passed by, then fading just as quickly into the night. It became oddly hypnotic and eventually exhausting. By around 9:30 p.m., I felt myself zoning out. The road was a blur of wet pavement, and my eyelids were starting to feel heavy. I decided to pull into the next gas station I came across to grab a coffee, top off my tank, and wake myself up before the final leg of the drive. About 15 minutes later, I spotted a faded gas station sign flickering in the distance. It wasn't part of any recognizable chain, just a rundown station with a few aging pumps and a tiny, dimly lit convenience store. There were no other cars in the lot, no houses nearby, and nothing but darkness stretching out on all sides. I pulled up to one of the pumps and stepped out into the cool, damp air. Rain was starting to drizzle again, tapping lightly on the roof of the SUV. As I reached for the pump handle, I nearly jumped out of my skin when a voice spoke up beside me. "Evening." I turned to see a man approaching slowly from the side of the building. He was older, probably late 50s or early 60s, wearing a tattered coat and worn-out boots. His grey beard was patchy, and he looked like he hadn't had a decent meal or shelter in weeks. Something about him made me immediately uneasy, though I couldn't put my finger on why. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing around, as if checking for something or someone. He stopped a few feet from me, lifted his hand halfway in a cautious gesture and said, "Take the exit back onto the highway." I blinked at him, confused. "What?" He pointed again toward the way I had come in and repeated, "Take the exit back onto the highway. Now." There was no aggression in his tone, just urgency. I nodded awkwardly, said okay, and watched as he backed away and sat down by the side of the store, pulling a hood over his head. Still confused, I returned to my SUV. His warning was strange. The exit he pointed to was a one-way road. If I followed it, I'd be driving against traffic, which made no sense. The normal exit, the one I was supposed to take, was clearly marked and unobstructed. I stared down both paths, debating what to do. My gut told me that man was either crazy or trying to warn me. In the end, I decided to ignore him. I didn't want to end up in a ditch, or worse, for following some odd advice from a stranger. I topped off my tank, got back in the car, and drove toward the designated highway on-ramp. As soon as I merged onto the road, I noticed something strange. None of the streetlights were on. The entire stretch of highway was pitch black, and my headlights seemed to barely cut through the darkness. I slowed down and gripped the wheel tightly, scanning the road ahead. A few seconds later, a flash of movement on the side of the road caught my eye. A figure, barely visible in the rain, just standing there. I didn't get a good look, but it sent a chill down my spine. Then, without warning, a pickup truck barreled out of the darkness and came to a screeching halt directly in front of me. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding. Every door on the truck swung open, and 4 men jumped out, running toward my vehicle. Each one was holding a weapon. Bats, machetes, long knives, and they weren't wearing masks. They just stared at me with hollow, dead eyes. No fear, no hesitation, just pure intent. Panic surged through me. I threw the car into reverse and hit the gas, watching as the men sprinted up to my windows. One of them slammed a bat against the hood, but I kept moving. As I reversed onto the shoulder, my headlights swept across the trees, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of people, all emerging from the shadows. Men, women, even a few teens, standing silently on the side of the road. Their faces were blank, almost expressionless, but their eyes, they were locked onto me. I didn't think. I turned the wheel hard, spun the SUV around, and floored it back in the direction I'd come. A few figures gave chase for a moment, but they quickly disappeared behind me. When I finally felt safe enough to slow down, I pulled over and called the police, breath ragged and hands shaking. But weirdly, I never heard back. No follow-up, no mention of the report, nothing. It was like it never even happened. To this day, I don't know who those people were or what would have happened if I hadn't turned around in time. But one thing's clear. That old man at the gas station, he was trying to warn me. And I'll never forget the look in his eyes. He wasn't crazy. He was trying to save my life. Story 2. It was a typical Friday evening, just after I'd finished my last college class for the week. Like most weekends, I had no plans except one: grind out as many DoorDash deliveries as I could to earn money. Being a student living off campus, juggling tuition, rent, food, and gas wasn't easy, so every Friday and Saturday night, I hustled, dashing until my energy ran out. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me afloat. The night started off strong. I got a decent number of orders right out the gate, most of them close to campus, and I was making solid money. But after the dinner rush came and went, things hit a frustrating lull. Orders dried up. The few that did come through were low-paying, barely worth the gas it would take to complete them. I drove around aimlessly for about an hour, hoping something worthwhile would pop up. Then, finally, an order came through that wasn't terrible. It was a little over 11 miles away, not exactly close, but the pay was decent. Nothing extraordinary, but more than enough to justify taking it. I accepted without hesitation, relieved to be back in motion. I pulled into the restaurant, picked up the order, and started the drive. The app said it would take about 18 minutes to get there. That was longer than most deliveries I usually did. Most of the customers were college students living nearby, or locals around the university district. Once you got more than 10 or 12 minutes out, you started to reach mostly farmland, endless fields of crops, dirt roads, and sparse houses miles apart. As I passed the halfway mark, the houses grew farther and farther apart. Street lights became non-existent. Civilization was quickly fading behind me, and ahead, all I saw were silhouettes of barns, fields, and the dark stretch of empty road. There were no cars, no people, not even the occasional porch light in the distance, just blackness, save for the faint glow of my headlights bouncing off gravel and grass. Eventually, the GPS announced I had arrived at the address. To my right was a long, narrow dirt driveway that stretched out across a massive field. At the far end of the path was a small, isolated house. It looked like it had been sitting there for decades, untouched. There were no neighboring homes, no visible fences or animals, just this one lonely house in the middle of nowhere. Driving down that dirt path was strangely unsettling. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was separating from the rest of the world. The only sound was the low crunch of gravel beneath my tires. The field around me swallowed everything, leaving only darkness on all sides. I parked in front of the house and grabbed the bag from the passenger seat. I kept the engine running, mostly because I didn't want to stand in complete silence. The house was dark, completely dark except for a single porch light above the door. I stepped out and approached cautiously, walking through a patch of tall, dry grass leading up to the porch. The wood beneath my feet creaked loudly, each step echoing in the still night. I knocked on the door and waited. Nothing. I turned around for a second, looking back at my car. It seemed much farther away now, just sitting there alone in the blackness, surrounded by tall grass and void. A moment passed. Then I knocked again, louder this time. Still no response. No movement inside. No shuffling. No lights turning on. That's when I started to really take notice of the place. Up close, the house looked abandoned. The wood siding was rotting in spots, the paint peeling badly. Windows were cracked or caked with grime. The porch felt like it could collapse under my weight. The only thing that suggested anyone might actually live here was that porch light, just that one solitary light. But then I noticed something odd. The light casing had a telltale solar battery on top, a cheap kind you see in garden fixtures. It probably turned on automatically at dusk. That meant it didn't need anyone to physically turn it on. In fact, no one had to be in the house at all. Just as that realization hit, I heard a rumble behind me. I spun around. A pair of headlights appeared at the far end of the dirt path. A car had turned onto the same driveway and was coming up fast. It stopped just behind my SUV. My heart started to pound. I stood frozen on the porch, watching as the driver's door opened and a man stepped out. I squinted through the light. He didn't say anything. He didn't wave. He just stood there next to his car, staring at me from the shadows. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me. Trying to play it cool, I raised my voice and asked, "Hey, did you place a DoorDash order?" No reply. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there motionless, like he was waiting for something. That was the moment the unease became full-blown dread. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong. This wasn't just a late customer. This was a setup, or worse. I took a step back toward the door, hoping maybe someone was inside after all. Maybe I was just paranoid. But there was still no movement, no lights, no sound from inside the house. I was stuck, trapped between a decaying house and a complete stranger blocking my car in the middle of nowhere. Then, without thinking, I made a split-second decision. I dropped the food bag right there on the porch and bolted. I ran full speed off the porch and around the side of the house, crashing through the tall grass and into the open field behind it. The grass was dense and wild, slapping at my legs and arms as I pushed through. I didn't dare look back right away, afraid I'd see him chasing me. I just kept running, hoping to put as much distance between us as I could. Eventually, the grass grew so thick and high that I could barely see where I was going. I ducked down, trying to stay low and quiet. My chest heaved, my breath fogging in the cold air. I waited, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just the wind moving through the stalks. I crouch-walked for what felt like an eternity, zigzagging through the field until finally I saw a faint porch light in the distance, a real one, this time connected to a home that looked lived in. I made my way toward it and eventually found myself in someone's yard. From there, I reached a road and managed to get a signal to call for help. The police came and picked me up. They drove back with me to check out the area, but, of course, the man was gone, vanished without a trace, no car. No footprints. Nothing. My own vehicle hadn't been tampered with. The food bag was still sitting neatly on the porch of that rotted-out house. But that only made things worse, because if he didn't want to steal my car or rob me, what did he want? To this day, I don't know who that man was. I don't know why that address was listed as a drop-off location, or if it even belonged to anyone at all. But I'm convinced that if I hadn't trusted my gut and ran when I did, I wouldn't be here to tell the story. Story 3. This happened during a long road trip I was taking after spending the holidays with my family. I'm not usually the type to drive long distances. Honestly, I'll take a plane for anything over a couple of hours. But this year was different. Airline ticket prices had skyrocketed out of nowhere, and a round trip to just a few states over would have cost me more than $800. It didn't make sense financially, so I decided to drive myself instead. I made sure to plan everything out carefully, down to the last detail, so I'd have a few days to settle back in before returning to work. However, on the day I was set to leave, a severe snowstorm rolled in, completely throwing off my schedule. I had to wait it out for 2 extra days before I could even get on the road safely. When I finally did leave, the roads were nearly empty. Most people had already wrapped up their holiday travel plans, and the highways I was on were far removed from any major cities. At first, I appreciated the solitude. I turned up some music and tried to enjoy the quiet winter landscape. The first 8 or 9 hours went by without any major issues. I was exhausted, of course, but the snow-covered roads demanded my full attention, so I stayed alert. It was around 10:30 p.m. when I started to feel the fatigue creeping in more aggressively. I was still about 2.5 hours away from a hotel I'd booked in a small rural town, so I pushed forward. That's when I noticed something unusual. A faint pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. It was the first vehicle I'd seen on the road in well over an hour. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the lights were growing larger far too quickly, meaning whoever was behind me was going way over the speed limit. I assumed they'd pass me, as it was a single-lane road with occasional clearings. But once they reached me, they didn't pass. Instead, the vehicle, now clearly a large, boxy van, slowed down to match my speed and stayed locked just a few feet behind me. I was immediately on edge. This wasn't normal. It wasn't like they were tailgating out of impatience. It was too calculated for that. They didn't even back off when I tapped my brakes a couple of times. The van stuck close, too close. So close, in fact, I couldn't even see its front bumper or license plate anymore. I kept looking for an opportunity to get away or lose them, but there were no exits for miles. Finally, a gas station appeared in the distance, an isolated one, the only sign of civilization I'd seen for a while. I decided to take the exit, hoping that either the van would keep going or I could put some space between us. But the moment I signaled and turned off the highway, they followed. I pulled up to one of the pumps, trying to stay calm but hyper-aware of every movement. The gas station was eerie. Half the lights were off, and a closed sign hung in the convenience store window. Beyond the dim glow of the parking lot, everything around us was pitch black. Snow-covered fields stretched out in every direction with no houses or structures in sight. As I looked into my mirror again, I saw the van pull into the pump behind me. A man stepped out, walked around to the driver's side, and began filling his tank. At that point, I told myself maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe this was all coincidental. Still, something felt wrong. Too wrong. I got out of my car slowly, trying to appear casual, and began fueling up. I kept glancing over. The man from the van finished pumping his gas unusually fast, and then walked to the back of his vehicle. I watched as he opened the back doors, and that's when I heard it. That loud, sharp ratcheting sound as the doors were yanked upward. My instincts went into full survival mode. I didn't wait to see what came out of the van. I yanked the pump from my car, let it clatter to the ground, and dove back into the driver's seat. Just as I locked the doors, I saw them. 3 men, sprinting from behind the van straight toward me. One grabbed the door handle and pulled with all his strength, shaking the whole car. I barely managed to start the engine, my hands trembling on the ignition. They tried every door. I could hear the slams and the pounding, but none of them got in. Then, just like that, they stopped. As if on cue, all 3 of them sprinted back to their van. No yelling, no panic, just precise, silent movements like they'd done this before. Before I could even process what was happening, they were gone, driving back in the direction we came from. I called the police, shaking and still catching my breath, and reported everything, but I never heard back. Not a single follow-up or update. It's like it was swept under the rug entirely. Looking back, I truly believe they were professionals, maybe part of a trafficking ring or some coordinated abduction operation. What scares me most is how clean and practiced it all was. They didn't need to speak or plan on the fly. They had a routine, and I just barely disrupted it by not being an easy target. I don't like to think about what would have happened if I'd hesitated a few more seconds. That gas station, that empty road, it could have easily been the last place I was ever seen. Story 4. As a seasoned truck driver with nearly 2 decades of experience, I've traversed countless miles across the country. The route from the East Coast to the far reaches of the West had become a familiar path, one I've driven more times than I can count. Each journey bore the same landmarks, the same rest stops, and the same stretches of endless highway. Over the years, I'd encountered my fair share of oddities, strange lights in the sky, peculiar roadside attractions, and the occasional eccentric fellow traveler, but nothing that truly unsettled me. That is until one fateful night. Approximately 14 hours into my cross-country haul, a formidable storm began to brew on the horizon. Dark clouds loomed overhead, and the once clear sky transformed into a tumultuous sea of grey. Rain began to pour in torrents, the rhythmic patter against the windshield creating a hypnotic cadence. Visibility diminished rapidly, and the road ahead became a blur of wet asphalt and distorted headlights. Fatigue weighed heavily on me, and I decided it was prudent to find the next truck stop to rest and wait out the storm. The highway stretched endlessly, flanked by dense forests and devoid of other vehicles. The isolation was palpable. Suddenly, a pair of headlights emerged in my rearview mirror. They appeared out of nowhere, growing brighter at an alarming rate. I hadn't noticed any vehicles approaching for miles, and their sudden presence was jarring. The vehicle, a large van, closed the distance rapidly, settling uncomfortably close to the rear of my trailer. I expected the driver to overtake me, given their speed, but instead they maintained their position, tailgating me with unsettling precision. Their headlights were so close that they illuminated the interior of my cab, casting long, flickering shadows. Then, without warning, the van's headlights extinguished, plunging the road behind me into darkness. A chill ran down my spine. I kept my eyes glued to the mirrors, straining to discern any movement. The van was still there, its silhouette barely visible against the stormy backdrop. The audacity of someone driving without headlights in such treacherous conditions was beyond comprehension. Relief washed over me when a sign indicated a truck stop just a few miles ahead. I signaled and took the exit, hoping to lose the ominous tail. The van followed suit, mirroring my every move. The truck stop was eerily deserted, save for a few parked rigs and the dim glow of the gas station's lights. I pulled into a parking spot, cutting the engine and allowing the silence to envelop me. The van parked a few spaces away, its engine idling. I watched as a man stepped out, his features obscured by the rain and darkness. He moved with purpose, disappearing behind his vehicle. Moments later, I heard the unmistakable sound of a van's rear doors being flung open. An overwhelming sense of dread settled over me. Before I could react, 3 figures emerged from the shadows, sprinting toward my truck. Their faces were obscured by hoods, and they wielded blunt objects, bats, crowbars, and something that gleamed ominously in the dim light. Panic surged through me. I slammed the door lock button, ensuring all entry points were secured. The assailants reached my truck, pounding on the doors and attempting to pry them open. The cab shook with each impact. I fumbled for my phone, hands trembling, and dialed 911. My voice was barely coherent as I relayed my location and the unfolding situation. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way. Suddenly, as if a silent signal had been given, the attackers ceased their assault. They retreated to their van, doors slamming shut, and the vehicle sped off into the night. I remained in my cab, heart pounding, until the flashing lights of a patrol car illuminated the parking lot. Officers took my statement, scoured the area, and reviewed any available surveillance footage. Unfortunately, the grainy images provided little insight into the identities of my assailants. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the incident from my mind. The calculated nature of the attack, the precision with which they executed their plan, it all pointed to a group that had done this before. I share this story as a cautionary tale. Even the most routine routes can harbor unexpected dangers. Always remain vigilant, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the perils that can lurk in the shadows of a rainy night. Story 5. Back when I was in college, I worked part-time delivering pizzas for a small local shop not far from my school. It wasn't glamorous or anything close to ideal, but it helped me pay for my car, rent, and all the other things life threw at me during those years. Most days, I worked right after class, pulling long shifts until closing time. The job was repetitive, sometimes frustrating, and often boring, but it was enough to keep me from going completely broke while I juggled my education. This night started just like all the others. I clocked in a little after 4 p.m. and was sent out for back-to-back deliveries. It was a steady evening, nothing out of the ordinary. Around 9 p.m., I took my quick break, grabbed a snack, and got back on the road again. Not long after, I picked up another order, a few pizzas and drinks, and set off. At first, the destination didn't raise any red flags. I typed it into the GPS and hit the road, expecting another simple drop-off. But as I drove, I started noticing that this route was taking me in a direction I hadn't expected. It led me out of town, away from the neighborhoods and busy streets I was used to. Gradually, the scenery became more industrial, quiet streets, warehouses, and empty parking lots. Eventually, I found myself pulling into what looked like a business complex. It was filled with dark office buildings, the kind that usually shut down hours before. The GPS guided me through a long, winding parking lot that seemed completely deserted. No cars, no lights, no signs of movement anywhere. I finally reached the end of the lot, stopping in front of a plain-looking building with tinted glass doors. The address painted on the glass matched the one from the order, but something about the whole place felt off. There were no lights inside except for one faint glow deeper down a hallway. No company name, no activity, just silence and shadows. I double-checked the address on my phone, thinking maybe I'd typed something wrong, but everything matched. I even searched nearby for similar addresses just in case. But no, this was it. I reluctantly put the car in park, grabbed the pizzas, and got out. The cold air hit me immediately, and the silence was thick enough to make me shiver. I approached the door and knocked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the door creaked open and a man stepped out. He looked to be in his late 40s, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, smiling in a way that felt just a little too forced. His energy was almost too much. He greeted me like I was a long-lost friend, saying how glad he was that the food had finally arrived because everyone upstairs was starving. Trying to stay polite, I smiled and nodded. I glanced past him, expecting to maybe catch a glimpse of the party he mentioned, but all I saw was that one light halfway down a long, dark hallway. No noise, no decorations, no people. It didn't feel like a party was going on anywhere inside. I told him the total, and he fished out a wad of cash from his wallet, handing it to me along with a very generous tip, something like $40. Before I could even thank him, he asked if I could help him carry the rest of the order up to the 3rd floor where the party was supposedly happening. It caught me off guard. I already had everything in my hands, and honestly, there wasn't much to carry, but now I felt like I owed him a favor after such a big tip. Still, something in the back of my mind was waving red flags. There was no reason he couldn't carry it himself. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and started walking toward a door that led to the stairwell, motioning for me to follow. Hesitantly, I trailed behind at a distance. As I stepped into the stairwell entrance, I was hit with a blast of cold air. All the lights were off. The only illumination came from behind me, from the hallway I'd just left. The man started walking up the stairs, humming to himself, but stopped halfway when he noticed I hadn't followed. He turned around and made a joke about the lights being out, something about how the building was cheap. But when he realized I wasn't laughing or moving, his grin faded. That's when everything changed. He suddenly bolted down the stairs toward me, his cheerful act gone. His face twisted into something else entirely. Anger, maybe desperation. I panicked. I dropped the pizzas where I stood and bolted out of the stairwell, running through the hallway and out the front door as fast as I could. I didn't look back until I reached my car. As I jumped inside and locked the doors, I looked up and saw the man standing at the entrance, watching me, expressionless. Then he disappeared back into the building and slammed the door behind him. I drove to a nearby parking lot, shaking as I called the police and tried to explain what had just happened. By the time they arrived, the man was gone. The building was completely empty. No lights, no party, no 3rd floor celebration. It was just a vacant office with no tenants listed anywhere. And since he paid in cash, there was no name, no receipt trail, no lead to follow. To this day, I don't know what was really waiting on that 3rd floor, and I don't want to know. I just hope nobody else ever walks into that same trap thinking it's just another delivery. Story 6. When I was in high school, I took a job delivering Chinese food for a local restaurant. I didn't expect much from it, just a way to make some extra money for car payments and rent. It was typical of most first jobs, slow and boring some days, hectic and stressful on others. But as a delivery driver, I was thankful to avoid working in the restaurant itself, dealing with the crowds of customers. It was a Friday night when things took a turn. I clocked in at 5 p.m, ready for my usual shift. Fridays were always busy, and tonight was no different. By 9 p.m, I was exhausted but still pushing through the deliveries. I had a few more to make before I could take my break, so I grabbed the orders and headed out. The first 2 deliveries were close by, nothing out of the ordinary. But the last one seemed to take me to a part of town I didn't recognize. The GPS directed me down a road I hadn't traveled before, and I immediately noticed the atmosphere change. The busy streets faded into quiet, dimly lit roads, and soon the houses became sparse. I followed the GPS as it took me deeper into an unfamiliar neighborhood. The road was narrow, cracked with potholes, and lined with overgrown bushes and neglected lawns. The houses were small, hidden behind thick layers of brush. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. Something about this place didn't sit right. Finally, the GPS pinged. "You've arrived." But when I looked around, I saw nothing. No house in sight. I turned on my brights and scanned the area. In the distance, through the overgrown foliage, I could make out the outline of a small house. It was set far back from the road, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. I slowly drove toward it, realizing the driveway was so overrun with weeds and vines that it was impossible to drive on it. I parked at the side of the road and grabbed the food, already feeling uneasy about what I was getting into. As I walked up the overgrown driveway, it was like something out of a horror movie. The house looked old, worn down, and abandoned. Vines were creeping up the sides, windows were covered in grime, and the entire structure looked like it hadn't been cared for in years. The weeds were so tall they reached my knees. But I was just a kid with a first job, and I couldn't afford to lose it. I had to deliver this food. So I pushed aside the growing feeling of dread and knocked on the front door. Almost immediately I heard footsteps from inside. The door opened, revealing a young woman. At first glance, she seemed completely normal, well-dressed, well-groomed, but something about her didn't match the eerie surroundings. The stark contrast between her appearance and the decaying house sent a chill down my spine. She smiled and in a calm, almost mechanical voice said, "Come in, everyone's waiting for you." My heart skipped a beat. The tone of her voice, the unsettling invitation, it was too much. I froze, suddenly overwhelmed with the sense that something was horribly wrong. I took a step back, stumbling slightly as I tried to make sense of the situation. But before I could say anything, I heard rustling from the side of the house. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move fast enough. From behind the house, two men emerged, sprinting toward me. I panicked, dropping the food and bolting down the driveway. The tall grass and thick vines tripped me up, but I kept going, not daring to look back. I finally reached my car, scrambled inside, and locked the door. I glanced back at the driveway just as the two men stopped running. They stood there for a moment, staring at me, before they disappeared back into the darkness from where they had come. Shaking with adrenaline, I slammed the car into drive and sped off, my heart pounding in my chest. I drove to a nearby parking lot to calm down, then called the police. I gave them all the details, though I wasn't sure how much help it would be. By the time they arrived, the men were long gone, and the house was still empty. The police investigated, but there was no sign of the people I had encountered. The property, it turned out, was state-owned, and the trespassing sign at the beginning of the road had been deliberately removed and tossed into the tall grass. It was clear that this had been some sort of trap, but the question of what they had intended to do remained unanswered. My boss was understanding when I reported the incident. He told me to focus on my safety, which I was grateful for. The entire experience still haunts me. I was lucky to escape, but I can't shake the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts and run when I did. I hope nobody else ever finds themselves in that situation, but if they do, I just hope they're as lucky as I was to make it out unscathed. Story 7. I had some extra time on my hands that night, and having consumed a few too many cups of coffee earlier in the day, I felt a surge of energy that I decided to put to good use. I was working for DoorDash, cruising down the highway toward my next delivery. It was extremely late, and the roads were completely empty, giving the entire night a peaceful and calm vibe. It was the kind of night every delivery driver dreams of. No traffic, no distractions, just quiet streets and a steady job. As I was driving along, my phone suddenly buzzed. It was the customer calling me, but before I had a chance to answer, they hung up. The phone call had only rung for a couple of seconds, so I assumed it was just a mistake, or perhaps they dialed me by accident. Still, just to be sure, I decided to call them back. The phone rang several times, but there was no answer. I shrugged it off, figuring maybe they were just busy or had called me by mistake, and I focused on the road once again. I got off the highway and turned into a quiet neighborhood. It was the kind of street you'd find in any suburban area. Neat houses, well-maintained lawns, and the typical calm residential vibe. When I got to the address, I parked my car right in the driveway and grabbed the delivery bag. As I walked toward the front door, I noticed something a bit unusual. The door was slightly ajar. At first, I wasn't sure if it had been left open for me, or if it was simply like that by accident. So I lightly knocked on the door and called out, letting them know I was there to drop off their food. It was then that I heard something strange. From inside the house, I heard a muffled thump, almost as if someone was banging on a door somewhere in the back of the house. It was unsettling, and I immediately felt a chill run down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, but decided to open the door a little wider and called out again, repeating that I was dropping off their food. A few seconds of silence passed before I heard another door open from deep within the house, and a man appeared from around the corner. The man looked distressed, and honestly he looked a little bothered, but I couldn't quite figure out if it was because of me or something else. He walked down the hallway, his eyes fixed on me, and as he reached the doorway, he didn't say a word. He just started reaching for the bag of food in my hands. But then those strange thumping noises came again, louder this time, as if someone or something was moving around in the house. I looked past the man in confusion, wondering what was going on. He seemed to notice me looking, and his eyes flickered toward the hallway before he quickly snapped back to focus on me. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to mask the growing unease in my voice. The man didn't answer right away. He just stared at me for a moment, and I could tell something was off. Then, in a tone that sounded both strange and demanding, he said, "Why don't you bring the food inside for me?" A cold wave of dread washed over me. For a split second, I almost moved forward, but something deep inside me told me that it was a bad idea. No, it was a terrible idea. There was no way I was going inside this man's house, especially not with those noises coming from the back. I hesitated, but the man seemed to notice my reluctance. His face twisted with irritation, his anger rising quickly. Without warning, he grabbed the food right out of my hands, slammed the door shut, and locked it behind him. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. I could still hear his footsteps echoing down the hallway, and then the thumping noise ceased. My heart was racing, my adrenaline spiking. I quickly turned and rushed off the porch, not looking back. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and drove away as fast as I could, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Once I was in a safe spot, I decided to report the incident to the police. I told them everything that had happened, the odd phone call, the strange noises in the house, and most of all, the man's behavior. It didn't sit right with me, and I felt like something dangerous had just unfolded. My boss was incredibly understanding and didn't care about the order or whether I got paid for it. He was more concerned about my safety, which, looking back, was such a relief. He encouraged me to file a report, and that's exactly what I did. Hours later, the police informed me that the man had denied anyone else being in the house and refused their request to search his property. They didn't find anything suspicious, but I knew something was wrong. The entire situation felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this man was hiding something, or someone. The house was eerily quiet when I left, and I couldn't help but think that if I had gone inside like he had wanted, things might have turned out very differently. To this day, I don't know what would have happened had I agreed to go inside that house. I'll never forget the look in that man's eyes, or the feeling of pure dread that settled in my stomach when he asked me to step inside. Whatever was going on in that house, I'm glad I never found out. I just hope no one else has to experience what I did, and if they do, I hope they have the good sense to leave before it's too late. Story 8. It was a little after 2 a.m. when I finally left my friend Jake's house. We'd been playing games and talking all evening, completely losing track of time. By the time I hit the road, I was exhausted. Not just tired, but the kind of tired that makes every mile feel like it stretches on forever. Jake lives about an hour away, out in the more rural part of the state, and the road back home was a long, isolated stretch of highway that cut through endless farmland and patches of forest. For the first 15 minutes, I didn't see a single other car. The road ahead was just a narrow ribbon of asphalt lit by my headlights, vanishing into darkness. The monotony of the drive, the silence, the lack of anything moving, started to wear on me. I rolled down the window a little, letting the cold night air sting my face to keep me alert. Still, my eyelids felt heavier with every mile. Then suddenly something ahead caught the beam of my headlights. I blinked, leaned forward in my seat and slowed down. At first it looked like maybe an animal had wandered onto the road, but as I got closer, I realized what it actually was. A massive semi-truck, completely blocking the two-lane road. The whole truck was parked sideways, like it had been jackknifed or positioned deliberately, and both lanes were impassable. I brought my car to a full stop about 50 feet away, completely confused. There was no one else around, just me, this truck, and the quiet. I sat there for maybe a minute, trying to figure out what I was looking at. We were at least 20 minutes from the nearest town in either direction, and this part of the road was surrounded by thick forest and a steep drop-off on one side. There was barely enough shoulder to pull over, much less get around a truck this size. One side of the trailer was backed right up against the tree line. The other side had maybe a few feet of room before the edge dipped off into a grassy slope. It would have been extremely dangerous to try to go around. My first thought was that there'd been an accident. Maybe the driver had fallen asleep at the wheel or had a medical emergency. The truck wasn't damaged that I could see, but something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong here, like it was too still. After waiting another 30 seconds and seeing no movement, I decided I had to check it out. I turned off my engine, grabbed my phone and flashlight, and stepped out of the car. The cold night hit me instantly, along with a thick silence that felt unnatural. Even the usual sounds of crickets or distant animals were absent, just the crunch of gravel under my shoes as I walked toward the truck. As I approached the front of the trailer, I saw that the cabin light inside the truck was on. That gave me a bit of hope. Maybe the driver was inside and just waiting for help. I walked up to the door, knocked lightly, and called out, "Hey, are you okay in there?" No response. I waited a few seconds, knocked again, louder this time. "Hello? Do you need help?" Still nothing. No movement, no voice, no indication anyone had heard me. The window was too high up to see through from the ground, so I grabbed the door handle and used the side step to hoist myself up. I cupped my hands against the glass and peered in. What I saw made my stomach drop. The cabin was a mess. Papers, bags, even what looked like broken glass scattered across the seats and dashboard. It looked like someone had been in a panic, or maybe a fight. There was no one in the driver's seat or the passenger side, and then I noticed something even stranger. The opposite door, on the far side of the cab, was wide open. I climbed down slowly, nerves starting to tighten in my chest. Something was definitely wrong. I started walking around the front of the truck, aiming to check out the open door. That's when I froze. Just beyond the edge of the road, coming up from the trees, I saw a man. He was tall, maybe 6'2" or more, and his long hair hung down past his shoulders in oily, tangled strands. His clothes were torn and dirty, and even in the dim glow of my headlights I could see dark stains all over his shirt and pants, dark red like dried blood. His face was streaked with dirt, and he looked like he'd been crawling through the forest. Alarmed, I called out to him, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" He didn't answer, didn't even glance at me. He just kept walking, steadily, right toward the truck. Something about his silence chilled me to the bone. I stepped back a bit, unsure of what to do. Then I said something, maybe out of nervousness, that changed everything. "I can call someone for you if you need." He stopped walking. Slowly, he turned his head to look directly at me. His eyes were wide, and there was something empty in them. Not fear, not pain, just nothing. We stared at each other for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Then, in a low, gravelly voice, he said, "I'm fine." His tone wasn't reassuring, it was threatening. He broke the eye contact, climbed into the truck through the open passenger door, and within moments, the engine roared to life. I didn't wait around, and I turned and sprinted back to my car, got in and hit the gas. I didn't care about getting home anymore. I drove straight back to Jake's house, hands shaking the whole way. When I got there, I told him everything, and we called the police. I gave them every detail I could remember, the location, the truck, the man, the direction he drove off in. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but I never heard anything more. No missing driver was found, no abandoned truck, nothing in the news. To this day, I don't know what happened on that road, but I know this. That man wasn't just some guy who'd gotten lost in the woods. Something bad happened out there. The way the truck was positioned, the mess in the cabin, and the way that man stared through me like I wasn't even there. It all points to something darker. Maybe the real driver was out there in the woods somewhere, never to be found. Maybe that man wasn't alone, or maybe he wasn't even really human. Whatever the truth is, it stayed with me ever since. That road, that night, it still haunts me. Story 9. I've worked for my dad's construction business every summer since I was 15. He owns a small but steady company, nothing huge, just a warehouse full of materials and equipment, a handful of job sites, and a rotating crew of workers. My dad runs the whole thing himself, managing orders, directing the teams, maintaining equipment, and keeping everything on track. During the school year, I'd only help on weekends when needed, but summers were a different story. I was expected to pull my weight. Most of my tasks were simple: picking up supplies, driving materials from the warehouse to different job sites, or running errands between locations. I wasn't trained to build or install anything yet, and besides, someone had to do the delivery work. A lot of jobs needed their materials ready before the workers even arrived in the morning, especially when schedules were tight. That meant early mornings, sometimes painfully early. This story took place on one of those mornings. It was around 3:45 a.m. when I arrived at the warehouse. The air still held that heavy stillness that only happens in the dead of night. Not quite morning, not quite midnight. I loaded up my truck with the materials listed on the work order, mostly insulation rolls, drywall, and some box tools for a repair job on the edge of town. This was an older building that had been out of commission for years, and now someone had finally bought it and was paying for restoration. The building was just off an access road on the far side of town, practically surrounded by forest. I'd never been to this one before, but the directions were easy enough. I pulled up about 30 minutes later, just before 4:30 a.m. The sun hadn't even hinted at rising yet. The world was still blanketed in black and silver shadows. What I didn't expect was to see another vehicle already there. There was a dark pickup truck parked just a few feet away from the building's entrance. Its lights were off, and it didn't look like anyone was around. The building itself was pitch black, no signs of movement inside or out. I assumed I'd be the first one there. My delivery window was at least an hour before the rest of the team was scheduled to arrive. I parked my truck and climbed out, curious but not alarmed. Maybe one of the crew had dropped off something early. I walked toward the pickup, trying to get a look inside, but the windows were heavily tinted. I couldn't see a thing. That's when I noticed something odd. This wasn't one of the company trucks. We only had a few vehicles assigned to employees, and this one didn't match any of them. Still, I figured maybe it was a personal truck. Some workers preferred to use their own. I turned toward the building and called out, "Hello? Anyone inside?" My voice echoed in the empty space around me. No answer. Not a sound. Not even birds yet. The whole area felt unnaturally still. I pulled out my phone and called my dad. He usually answered, even at ungodly hours, but this time it rang until it went to voicemail. I left a message saying I was at the site and there was a strange truck there just in case. Then I figured, whatever. Maybe someone had left it there overnight. I didn't want to fall behind, so I got to work unloading. It took nearly an hour to get everything out and into the designated staging area inside the building. I double-checked the delivery list, made sure everything was accounted for, then got back in my truck and started it up. That's when I noticed something in my rearview mirror. The headlights of the pickup truck suddenly flicked on. I froze. For a moment I thought maybe I'd accidentally turned on my own high beams, but no. The lights were coming from behind me. My heart jumped a little in my chest. Someone had been in that truck the entire time. And they hadn't said a word. I stopped my truck on the side of the narrow road that led out from the job site, watching through my mirror as the other vehicle slowly began to back up, pulling out from its parking spot. Whoever it was, they had been waiting for me, for someone else. I grabbed my phone again and called my dad a second time, hands shaking slightly. As I waited for him to pick up, I glanced out my window and there it was. The truck had pulled up right beside me, its window almost aligned with mine, but I couldn't see who was inside. The tinted glass revealed nothing, but I could feel them watching me. I didn't know why, but dread bloomed in my chest like ice water. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, still no answer, and pressed on the gas, hoping to just pull ahead and leave. But the truck sped up with me, swerving slightly to block my lane. It was deliberate, calculated. I hit the brakes, heart pounding, and looked around. To my left were trees and thick underbrush. No way I could turn into that. To my right, the truck was hemming me in tightly. I couldn't get around. I shifted into reverse, tires skidding slightly on the loose gravel. But as soon as I did, the other truck did too, following me, mirroring my moves. I started to panic, jerking the wheel to try to break away, but they accelerated just enough to bump into the side of my truck. My vehicle jolted, tires losing grip, and I veered off the edge of the shoulder. The nose of my truck slid down into the soft dirt. and I slammed against the side as I crashed into a tree with a sickening crunch of metal and bark. The engine stalled, my breath caught in my throat. I looked up in time to see the truck stop at the edge of the road, brake lights glowing in the dark. For a second, it looked like the driver might get out, but then the brake lights disappeared. The truck shifted into gear and sped off down the road, disappearing into the shadows. I sat there, stunned and trying to process what just happened. My head was spinning. Then, miraculously, another set of headlights appeared behind me, this time from the opposite direction. A second truck pulled up and stopped. A man jumped out and ran over to my window. It was Paul, one of the workers who had just arrived for the morning shift. "Are you okay?" he asked, clearly concerned. "What the hell happened?" I stammered something incoherent and pointed down the road where the other truck had gone. Paul's eyes narrowed. That looked like Samuel's truck. Samuel had been working for my dad for a few months. Quiet guy, kept to himself. Nobody really knew much about him. After Paul helped me get my truck stabilized and back onto the road, we made our way back to the warehouse. I told my dad everything, and Paul explained what he saw. That's when the pieces started to come together. Over the next couple of days, we discovered that several expensive tools and materials had gone missing from that site, over $10,000 worth. My dad had been noticing small inventory discrepancies for a while, but thought it was just disorganization. It now looked like Samuel had been slowly stealing from us for months, and that night, he must have realized I could link him to the site. Maybe he panicked. Maybe he was trying to scare me into silence. Or maybe he had worse intentions. We reported everything to the police, but nothing came of it. The name Samuel used was fake. So were his work documents. No address, no real contact info. He vanished. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if Paul hadn't shown up when he did. I was the only person who saw that truck. The only one who knew it wasn't supposed to be there. Maybe Samuel thought if I disappeared, no one would look too hard. I still work for my dad every summer, but I never go to a job site alone before daylight anymore. Story 10. I've been working as a local truck driver for a major grocery chain in our city for a little over 6 years now. Unlike long-haul or regional drivers, my route keeps me within roughly a 100-mile radius. That means I'm usually making round trips between the company's main warehouse on the edge of the city and various stores scattered throughout the area. It's not glamorous work, but it's stable, and more importantly, I get to go home every night to sleep in my own bed instead of spending the night at truck stops or parking lots hundreds of miles from home like many of my long-distance driving friends. That day had started like most others. Early morning coffee, a pre-trip inspection, a couple deliveries downtown. It was steady, but nothing unusual. I made my way through 5 different stores, dropping off full pallets of groceries and picking up empty ones. After wrapping up at my 5th and final location, one of the busier stores on the north side of the city, I checked the clock. It was already past 9 p.m. The sun had long set, and the streets were thinning out. Perfect time to head back. That particular store was always the farthest stop on my route, so getting back to the warehouse took a good hour and a half depending on traffic. But by that time of night, the roads were nearly empty. It was peaceful, even kind of relaxing, at least usually. I'd been driving for about an hour and was maybe 15 minutes from the warehouse when I noticed my fuel gauge was dangerously close to empty. I'd been riding on fumes longer than I should have, but I'd been in a rush and figured I'd fill up on the return trip. So I pulled into the nearest truck-friendly gas station, one of those larger ones with wide diesel lanes and overnight parking spots for semis. The place was almost entirely deserted, aside from one pickup truck parked on the far side near the edge of the lot. A group of guys stood around it, laughing and talking, maybe 4 or 5 of them. I didn't pay much attention at first, figuring they were just waiting on someone or having a smoke break. I pulled into the diesel lane, climbed out of my cab, and started the pump. While I waited for the tank to fill, I leaned against the side of the truck, stretching a little. That's when I noticed it. The group of guys by the pickup were staring at me. At first, I thought maybe they were just curious. Truckers aren't an uncommon sight, but we still tend to draw attention, especially when we're in massive rigs that take up half the lot. But this felt different. They weren't just glancing, they were watching. One guy elbowed another, then tilted his chin in my direction. A couple of them were muttering to each other and laughing. I kept my cool, but I stayed alert. I've dealt with enough weird situations on the road to know when something's off. Still, I figured they were just waiting for me to leave so they could do donuts in the parking lot or get drunk without someone reporting them. The pump clicked off. I replaced the nozzle, climbed back into my cab, and pulled out of the station. But as soon as I did, the pickup truck behind them rumbled to life and pulled out as well, right behind me. Now they had my attention. They followed close as I got back on the road, hugging the edge of my trailer like they were tailgating me on purpose. I kept checking my mirrors. They weren't just staying behind me, they were actively swerving within their lane, accelerating and braking erratically like they couldn't keep a steady speed. I didn't panic, not yet, but I knew I had to take action. I reached for my phone, mounted on the dash, and called the police. I told them there was a pickup full of possibly intoxicated individuals driving recklessly behind me and that I was concerned for other drivers on the road. I gave them my location and direction, and they said they'd send someone to intercept if I stayed on my current route. Just a few minutes later, the pickup veered into the lane beside me. I glanced down at them from my elevated seat. The group looked wild-eyed and chaotic, yelling things I couldn't hear through the glass. One guy in the passenger seat was pointing at me and shouting over his shoulder to the others. Whatever they were planning, it was coordinated. Then, in an instant, they sped up, swung in front of me, and slammed on their brakes. My heart jumped into my throat. I hit my own brakes hard, the cab lurching forward violently as I tried to avoid rear-ending them. My trailer swayed dangerously behind me, but I managed to come to a full stop just feet from their bumper. Then all hell broke loose. Every door of the pickup flew open. 4 guys leapt out, running directly toward my cab from both sides. I didn't wait to see what they wanted, whether they were trying to rob me, hijack the truck, or worse. Instinct took over. I threw the truck into reverse and floored it, watching them scatter just before I backed into the road's shoulder. But I was still trapped. I didn't have space to safely turn without risking a trailer rollover. My only option was forward, and through them. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the gear into drive and hit the accelerator. The truck roared forward, and just before impact, the men jumped clear. I plowed directly through their abandoned pickup. The sound of crunching metal and shattering glass filled the night, but I didn't stop to look back. I drove fast and hard for the next 10 minutes, adrenaline pumping through my veins. When I finally pulled into the warehouse yard, the place was lit up with flashing red and blue lights. The police had already made it to the scene and found the pickup totaled on the side of the road, with the 4 men standing around it looking stunned and, frankly, pathetic. The officers told me later that all of them were intoxicated and uncooperative. They wouldn't say what they were doing, where they were going, or why they targeted me. I don't know if they were trying to rob the truck, carjack me, or just screw around and scare someone for fun. But one thing was clear. If I had frozen, hesitated, or made the wrong call in that moment, it could have ended much worse. I could have gotten hurt, or worse, not made it home at all. Some people don't realize how quickly things can go wrong, even in a job as routine as local trucking. Every once in a while, something reminds you just how close danger can be, and how fast you have to react to stay safe. Story 11. I worked at Papa John's for a couple of years, starting during my senior year of high school and continuing into the early semesters of college. It wasn't exactly a dream job, but it paid decently and gave me enough flexibility with school. I mostly did night shifts, delivering pizzas, cleaning and helping to close down the store. Most nights were uneventful, especially on weekdays. Quiet roads, late-night radio, and the occasional weird customer, but nothing too wild. That night felt like any other. It was a slow Wednesday, and by around 10:30 p.m., things had come to a complete standstill. No orders, no walk-ins. No, just me, the shift manager, and another part-timer lazily wiping down counters and prepping the kitchen to shut everything down so we could leave at 11 sharp. I was already looking forward to being home, sitting on the couch with a snack and a show before bed. Then the phone rang. We all froze and looked at each other. It was late, and we hadn't had a call in nearly an hour. My manager, sighing dramatically, picked it up and began talking. I could tell by the tone of the conversation that it was a late-night delivery order. Of course. My shift technically ended in 25 minutes, but since I was the delivery guy on duty, the job fell to me. I tried not to show my irritation too much, but I wasn't happy about it. We prepped the pizza, a single large pepperoni, boxed it up, and I tossed it into the insulated bag before heading out. It was 10:47 p.m. when I walked out the door. The address was only about 12 minutes away, according to the GPS. That didn't sound too bad at first, until I arrived. The house was located at the end of a long, narrow gravel driveway that veered sharply off the main road and disappeared into the woods. At first, I couldn't see any kind of house or even lights through the trees, and I double-checked the GPS to make sure I was in the right spot. I zoomed in, and sure enough, there was a pin dropped on a property further down the path. The house was just deep in the woods, not visible from the road. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly turned onto the driveway, flicking on my high beams. The moment the tires left the pavement and hit the gravel, the surroundings seemed to close in. Trees leaned toward the narrow path from both sides, and the only sounds were my tires crunching the gravel and the occasional rustle of leaves overhead. The road curved twice, then suddenly opened up into a small clearing. That's when I saw the house. It was old, probably built 50 or 60 years ago. 2 stories with weathered wood siding and a porch that creaked under the weight of shadows. It was too big to be a simple cabin, but it had that unmistakable middle-of-nowhere vibe. A few dull yellow porch lights flickered dimly, just enough to reveal the edges of the clearing. Beyond that, it was pitch black. No neighbors, no cars, no sounds. There wasn't a clear driveway or parking area, so I just stopped on the gravel near the front of the house and left the headlights on. I stepped out, holding the pizza bags, and started walking toward the porch. The cold air was heavy with moisture, and every step made the leaves and twigs underfoot crunch louder than I expected. It was dead silent. As I reached the porch and raised my hand to knock, I heard something behind me. A soft, deliberate crunch of leaves from the direction of the path I had just driven up. I froze, pulse rising. I turned my head slowly, scanning the tree line, but it was impossible to see anything beyond a few feet. The woods were black, thick, and unmoving. I waited another second, then shook it off. Probably a deer, or even just a squirrel. Still, something didn't feel right. I knocked on the door, keeping my eyes fixed on the trees. After a moment, I heard slow, uneven footsteps from inside the house. The door opened. An older man stood there. He looked to be in his late 60s, maybe older. Short, grey-streaked hair, sunken cheeks, and cloudy eyes that didn't seem to blink. He didn't say a word, just stared at me. I forced a smile and held out the pizza. "I have a Papa John's order for you," I said. He continued to stare, then, without breaking eye contact, reached out and took the box. He set it down on a small table beside the doorway and pulled a worn wallet from his back pocket. Slowly, painfully slowly, he began counting out cash, thumbing through the bills with deliberate care. And then I heard it again. Crunch, crunch behind me, this time closer, right by my car. I turned, sharply this time, and stared hard at the area around my vehicle. The brights lit up a narrow cone, but anything outside that range was cloaked in darkness. I thought I saw movement, a flicker of motion near the passenger side door, but when I squinted, there was nothing. I felt a hand grip my shoulder. I whipped back around, heart hammering in my chest, only to see the man holding out the cash. His expression hadn't changed. He didn't seem alarmed or concerned, just slow. "Here, for you," he muttered. I took the bills quickly, barely checking the amount, and stepped back. "Thanks. Have a good night." Before I could turn around again, the door shut hard, the sound echoing across the field and into the woods like a gunshot. I stood there on the porch for a second, hand shaking slightly, then pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. I jogged back to my car, scanning the shadows as I moved, shining the beam in all directions. Nothing, no sounds, no movement, but the feeling, that creeping, choking sensation of being watched, only grew stronger. I jumped in, slammed the door, turned the car around, and sped back down the gravel path, heart still racing. I didn't feel calm until I was back on the main road and could see the lights of the city in the distance. The rest of the drive back was quiet, but I couldn't shake that feeling of unease. When I got back to the store, I clocked out, said nothing to anyone, and walked straight to my car. Before heading home, I decided to do a quick walk around. Everything seemed fine at first. Then I noticed it. Near the passenger door handle, there were 3 thin, curved scratches. Fresh, not deep, but definitely new. I ran my finger over them and felt a chill roll down my spine. I'll never know what was really going on out there. Maybe someone was hiding in the woods, waiting for me to leave my car. Maybe it was all a weird coincidence, or maybe it was a setup. Someone trying to get into the car while I was distracted at the door. If they had succeeded, they could have hidden in the back seat, waiting for the perfect moment. What they planned to do after that, I don't even want to think about. I just know I never took a delivery to that address again.